and you are seeing our live presentation, welcome. It's a virtual event to anything that's being held in this room today. So we welcome you all. Thank you all for joining us. Let me repeat this, 25 years. If this is your 25th year, please raise your hand. Really? Wow. Okay. So if you've been with me 15 years, raise your hand. Wow. How about 10? Okay, so if I could do this all day. If this is your first year, raise your hand. Wow. Wow. Well, welcome. Welcome. We hope that you'll come back and join us year after year after year. Okay. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our panel. They're going to come up to the stage. Our keynote panelists. We're going to give them a minute, and while they're coming up and settling in, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on today, or a little bit about, you know what, I'm going to tell you about how I met these panelists. So we're doing 25 years, so we're bringing some retro, as you see, right? It looks like the 90s. So we're bringing a little taste of the old, what we know, and we're asking new folks to join us too. So we've done that to our keynotes. So if you look at this, you'll say, I know Rebecca Coakley. Yep, you sure do. Because Rebecca has been working, I'm not doing this in order as you can tell, but Rebecca has been working here in Florida. Gosh, I've known her for almost 20-something years.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, that makes us both older, but
Yeah.
she's wearing it better than I am. But, so I met her, and she brought us the youth council opportunity. She promoted our youth council. Now, the youth council has been with the Family Cafe at least 16 years, and they're going to do their upcoming annual summit in August. So if you're between the ages of 15 and 30, that means you're youth or emerging leader. I just say you're 15 to 30. You can attend this youth-only event. Youth set the agenda, and it's a youth-only. So if you're above the age of 30, you don't get to attend, but don't worry, it's right next to a mall, so you can go shopping.
I'm gonna drop my kids off.
And then we have Maria Town there. Now, Maria, this is her third appearance. I think Rebecca's been here more than 3 times, but Maria, this will be her third appearance. Her fourth appearance, I don't know.
You had a throne that one year.
The squabble of who's been here then the longest. Maria, I first met Maria, and she introduced me to Converse. Because that's all she wore. And when she was working at the Obama administration, she came and she talked to everyone about how they're great. Try Converse, went home, bought a pair, and every year I'm in my Converse. She is wearing her signature Converse now.
Yes.
We also have another anecdote. Can I tell them about the?
Go ahead.
Okay. She may have I might be taking it from her. She also came one year, and we needed a place for her to sit. So the only thing we had Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus out in the hallway, so we brought in their throne, so she got to sit on the throne. But what was so cool about when she came in, she walked right up, the first year she came, walked right up and said, my boss wants a picture of you all, so everyone smiled. And she turned this way and did these selfies going around. I just thought that was so cool. And then the Converse, so she did 2 pools. And then to add to the new flavor, we have the Assistant Secretary for ODEP, which she'll tell you all about ODEP, and they work on disability policy and employment. Okay? Can I just say Assistant Director?
You can call this here.
Okay, Taryn
Assistant
Williams.
Secretary.
Okay, Secretary, I'm sorry. Secretary Williams.
We just got her promoted. Yeah.
Then our facilitator, and she's worked with the Youth Council before. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Jennifer. I think I swallowed a bug. No, I think that only worked for, what's her face? Oh, everyone's buying her tickets. Carly, you'll help me. Jennifer Thomas. Jennifer Thomas also works at ODEP, and she will help facilitate for this evening. When they're through, they're going to open it up to question and answers. And then some of them have to leave, but we're going to also let them do more intimate talk with you down, as we always do, on the end of the stage area, while we get ready to give out our door prizes. But let me tell you before they get on, something really important happened this past year. 4 years ago, we had one of our keynotes on the stage, Judy Heumann, the godmother of the disability movement. If you have not heard of Judy Heumann, you now have one of her 2 books that she co-wrote. Okay? Awesome. Best advocate. You are here. You are going to school. You are receiving rights, all because of this woman. We were so honored to have her come. We were so honored to have her come and have a panel discussion with our own Carly Fahey up here as a keynote. She will be missed, and we have a lot left to do, and she'll be guiding us from above, but we owe her a lot, and we will continue to honor her. So, Jennifer, would you like to take it away?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Good morning, Jennifer.
He has to turn.
He's tweaking it.
Are you all able to hear me now? Yes? No? Okay. So I think they're still working on the sound there in the back. One moment.
Yep, try now.
All right. So hi, everyone. How are you? Wonderful. Are you having a great day so far? Awesome. Well, my name is Jennifer Thomas. I am a policy advisor at the Office of Disability Employment Policy in the U.S. Department of Labor. And I just want to, again, state who we have on the stage today. As Lori mentioned, we have a treat for you. This is going to be an awesome panel. So to my immediate left, we have Assistant Secretary Williams of the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. We also have Rebecca Coakley. Rebecca is the program officer for the very first Disability Rights Program at the Ford Foundation. And then we also have Maria Town. Maria is the president and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities. Why don't you join me in welcoming them to the stage this morning. So I'm so honored to share the stage with these amazing women. We're going to go ahead and dive into the questions for today. The first one we'll start with Maria, and then we'll go to Rebecca next. Movement work is largely built on the backs of young people. What is the state of play today?
Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. So again, hello everyone. It is a real pleasure and honor to be back at Family Cafe, celebrating its 25th anniversary. Before I answer Jennifer's very insightful question, I wanted to share one anecdote that Lori did not share. So like many of you in this room, I have cerebral palsy. So I was born with a disability. Yeah, for my steeps. Born with a disability, and I grew up after the ADA was passed, after the Rehab Act existed, so I was mainstreamed and included, and that was incredible. But what that also meant was that I was the only kid I knew like me. And I remember the first time that I came to Family Cafe and I saw little girls with CP who were 5 and 10 and 15, and I could see the different stages of my own life reflected. So this is such a special space for me. And I'm really grateful to be here with all of you today. But building on that and to answer your question, Jennifer, I think it's really important that we talk about what movement work is. When we say movement work, what we mean is the kind of advocacy that pushes civil rights movements and movements for inclusion forward. And I think that most people have a specific idea of what that looks like. And because of that idea, it has been really on the backs of youth. So when we think about someone like Judy Heumann, when she organized the 504 sit-ins, right? How many of you have either had a 504 plan or been in a 504 meeting? Everybody's hand in this room is going to go up. That is the result of Judy Heumann's advocacy and the advocacy of many others. Well, when she was doing that, she was what, 23?
Yeah.
22, 23? Organizing the longest occupation of a federal building in U.S. history. That's kind of what we think of as movement work. But not everybody can go occupy a building for 40 days, right? I mean, for a lot of adults, adults often have jobs. They have families to support. They have care needs that have to be met. And so it's often young people who are out there organizing. People like, John Lewis, who started organizing when he was in high school and led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And in the disability rights movement, there are so many other figures, youth leader figures like Judy, who I can think of. And I think this is still true today. We're seeing students having to push for their rights to continued remote and inclusive education during the continued COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing students having to fight for their safety and trying to rid their schools of threats of mass shootings. And we're seeing young people with disabilities particularly saying, I will not be caught in the poverty trap that has hindered our movement for the past 70 years. So that's kind of a state of play, but I also think that things are changing because many young leaders with disabilities are now adults with disabilities and are parents. And we're seeing more opportunities for things like remote advocacy that doesn't have to happen during business hours, and spaces that create opportunities for folks with families and children to be together in the same place. So building a more inclusive movement, which we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much for that response, Maria. Rebecca, we'll turn to you next.
I would really just add to what Maria said. I mean, I remember talking to Judy years ago and saying to her, why is it no one ever called you a youth leader? And she kind of laughed and she was like, because we were it. She's like, we didn't have elders because our elders were either institutionalized, homeless, or dead. And she's like, so we were, in some ways very much the pioneers of this space, really, frankly, building on their parents' advocacy. Because so much of the advocacy in the disability rights space really started with non-disabled parents fighting for the rights of their kids to be able to access the American dream, whether it be to live independently, to have access to education, to have a job and meaningful work. And I think so often we downplay the advocacy of our young people, and we forget that, for example, here in Florida, the second law in the country that required the teaching of disability history was passed here in Florida by young people with disabilities on the Florida Youth Council. And that's hugely powerful. And Florida was the second state out of 10 states that went on to pass legislation like that. In every state, it was young people with disabilities that talked about the importance of learning about people like them, the importance of not just having, a very special learning session, but actually thinking about, so how in your math class do you integrate, if you're learning geometry, how do you, go around the school and do an evaluation of the ramps and look at how the dimensions of a ramp fit to scale for what the ADA requires? How do you think about the fact that learning that Mozart was deaf impacts your musical appreciation class and things like that? And so really true integration. And it was young people that demanded it and young people that got it done. You know, in the work that we're doing at the Ford Foundation in this moment, particularly both around our field building work, which is both strengthening existing organizations like Maria's and others, but also helping support the creation and development of new organizations that the disability community feels like they need for the development of like our community-wide infrastructure. But it's also, as Maria brought up the point, saying, we don't want to be poor. Why is it that there are rules about whether or not sleeping on my mom's couch counts against my income limits? Why is it, you know, caregiver policy isn't inclusive of parents with disabilities with some of these overtime caps? What does it mean for electronic visit verification and sort of the role of surveilling of families with disabilities in order to be able to access benefits that our young people and our you know, family members with disabilities need for their survival? And so it really is, you know, reframing how we think about what leadership is in this space.
Nice. And, you know, I've heard both of you talk about this leadership aspect and the fact that young people are still definitely very much engaged and want to be present, right? And that as we look at what needs to be addressed, making sure that young people not only have a seat at the table, but they are meaningful stakeholders and partners, making sure that families not only have a seat at the table, but they are meaningful stakeholders and partners. That's what I've kind of heard in what both of you said in your responses. So thank you very much for that. All right, so next we just want to shift a little bit to talking about some of the changes that we've, you know, experienced in our world as of late. Can you talk a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted the leadership of families and youth with disabilities today, as well as how it has impacted some of the issues that you work on? And for this question, we'll start with Maria.
So the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted every issue that we work on at the American Association of People with Disabilities. And specifically throughout the pandemic, we have seen so much leadership from young disabled people and their families. In schools, we have seen young people with disabilities, students with disabilities and their families really fighting to make sure that students had continued access to speech therapy, occupational therapy, and other supports during kind of these periods of remote schooling. We continue to see huge fights for actually making remote education accessible, and we see that for both disabled students and parents with disabilities. At AAPD, we worked with a little girl. She was 7, and her father was blind, and the platform that her school used for remote education wasn't accessible, so as her dad tried to help her with her homework, he couldn't. And I think this recognition of how inaccessibility, ableism, and other stigma around disability impacts not only disabled people, but those who love us and our allies really came through during COVID. The other place where we have done a lot of advocacy, and particularly seen a lot of shared advocacy of disabled people and our families, is in the healthcare space. So early on in the pandemic, we saw every single state in the country establish discriminatory crisis standards of care that basically said, if you have a disability like cerebral palsy or an intellectual disability or a chronic illness, or you're an older adult, we don't have to provide you with life-saving care. Your life is less valuable. We also saw hospitals and congregate settings like nursing homes and assisted living facilities establish very restrictive visitor policies, which meant that people who may need assistance communicating or moving through a space could not bring a family member with them to facilitate access. And so we saw disabled people and our families across the country pushing to change these policies, and this advocacy was extremely effective. We saw the U.S. Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services issue agreements with 9 different states to end crisis standards of care, and we saw guidance that affects the whole nation requiring hospitals to open up access to people and their facilitators for communication or other access needs, and this continues till this day. I could go on, but one other area that I want to talk specifically about is voting, and I want to give a shout out to Rev Up Florida. Their presentation is tomorrow. You should all go. Rev Up stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power, and it's AAPD's voting initiative. And during COVID, we saw some states make voter registration a lot easier. We saw other states make it significantly harder. And it became a real struggle for disabled people to figure out how, when, and where we could vote while still prioritizing our health and safety and the health and safety of those we love. And we saw so many people with disabilities and their families work hard together in communities to figure out how they could have their voices heard at the polls while still creating access and, again, maintaining that safety. So thank you, Jennifer, for the question.
Thank you, Maria. All right, Rebecca, would you answer next? Tell us a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted the leadership of families as well as youth with disabilities today, and then share with us a bit about how the pandemic has impacted the issues that you work on as well.
Definitely. I mean, I think we still see that COVID-19 is the #1 cause of death for people with intellectual disabilities in this country. And it's not changing. It hasn't changed over the last 2 years. And so continuing to be, let me adjust, see if I can make the microphone less squeaky. Continuing to be mindful of that. You know, I think we're talking about at least 20 million newly disabled people. And it shows up in a multitude of ways, whether it be brain fog, symptoms similar to myalgic encephalomyelitis, and I know the captioners are going to hate me for that, so MECFS, or chronic fatigue syndrome, you know, gastrointestinal side effects, etc. And this is a whole new population of the disability community. And disproportionately, they were people with disabilities to begin with that now have additional symptoms and side effects as a result of COVID. And so it's thinking about what are the shifts that we make? How do we, for this mass disabling event, how do we not repeat the errors we have made previously, whether it be around HIV and AIDS, whether it be around you know, our loved ones who came home from Vietnam or the Gulf War? How do we actually be proactive in meeting the needs of this new part of the disability community? You know, so it's things like supporting organizations that are doing that work, supporting all of our grantees at the Ford Foundation, and being mindful of the access and accommodation needs of people with long COVID. And realizing that it's not going anywhere. We're going to continue to see those numbers increase and shift. And how do we also, and I think this is a really important piece, how do we destigmatize the self-identification? How do we, you know, I remember talking to some elders in our community, and I said, so what are we going to do to let people know about things like parent training and information centers? How do we make sure that people know about centers for independent living? How do we make sure people know about, you know, protection and advocacy organizations like Disability Rights Florida? In this moment, like this is an opportunity to almost do like an ADA rebrand because of this massive new population of people with disabilities. And our elders were like, well, we haven't thought about that. They can come and find us. And I was like, no, we actually have to do things differently. Because we have such a unique opportunity to reframe the work and what the work looks like in this moment. And we can't go back to doing things the same old way because it's not the same old way.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And you know, you talked a bit, I'm sorry, can you all hear me? Okay. You talked a bit also about the self-identification piece, right? And we continue to see that be a challenge as far as people being newly diagnosed with disabilities, and with the pandemic, in addition to the various long COVID symptoms, we're seeing a lot of more mental health related cases. And I know with the National Youth Working Group that we have with our Youth Policy Development Center, a lot of the young people talked about how when they were, in isolation, right, because they couldn't be with their friends and their extended family and things of that nature, and some of them were even away at school and had to be stuck in their dorms, they talked about how this kind of motivated them to become more engaged in the movement. And so it just as you and Maria was speaking, it just made me think about how active young people still are and want to be, and how engaged they are, but how we also have to think about the various aspects of the impacts of the pandemic and how it has touched families and young people. Taryn, why don't you answer that question as well? So how has the pandemic, in your opinion, impacted the leadership of families and youth with disabilities? And also tell us a bit about how it has impacted issues that you work on as well.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll first say that the pandemic really transformed every way of life, and sometimes I catch myself because I will use the past tense as if the pandemic is not still disrupting so many of our systems and the services and how we connect with each other. Before I answer your question, I do want to just acknowledge and say thank you for having us here, and thank you for allowing us to share this space. It's not lost on me that I'm sitting on a panel with women that I've known for at least a decade, in some cases two. You all represent my community. You represent the peer mentors and the leaders that I look up to, look across to, and my hope for everyone here is that as you are in this space, in this ballroom, but also as you're outside these doors, that you're connecting with each other. I didn't know in 2004, 2005, that when I was just starting out on my journey that I would be making lifelong friendships. I didn't know that the people on this stage would become part of my chosen family. And so just as I was coming in today, I was thinking of what we mean when we say family cafe, and I hope that is the space for you. And it is the case that our family, our chosen family, our networks are the exact factors that we depended on over the last several years, because so many ways of life have been disrupted. We've seen at our work, we have a small agency. We focus on the employment of people with disabilities. So that means we're looking at the entire age range, from youth and young adults all the way into adulthood and retirement. And so many of our conversations are about what has the last few years meant for education, what have the last few years meant for opportunities to try out work, to get experiences in earning a wage and having those opportunities to develop your career aspirations and your interests. And the unfortunate reality is that a lot of those experiences have been lost. We spent years at home. We didn't have the individualized care and settings that we depend on, or the one-on-one attention that we would have received in classrooms or other environments. And I will very much try to be an optimist, but I will strike a note of real concern, and the one that really drives our work, which is that the loss in learning and the loss in opportunities to connect to the workforce will have a generational impact on youth and families today. I see it. That is what I know you all are experiencing. And I will also say that even with that pessimism, and Maria and Becca, we see this all the time, like there has also been a resurgence and a doubling down in advocacy and organizing on issues around mental health, on welcoming the new community of folks who have acquired long COVID, on advocacy around gun violence. So I see those moments where people have used the lessons learned to really drive the type of policy change that they want to see and the world that they want to see. And our role as an agency is to support that. We've always been engaged in family engagement, that we all together, since our roots are so deep. We have done this work together from various organizations. I know the last time I shared a physical stage with Jennifer, I was on a panel, I think maybe getting interviewed, interrogated by youth, and they were holding us accountable as government agencies. Like, what are we going to do to make sure that youth and young adults and families are connected and getting the services and supports that they need? And I say interrogation, like, and somewhat in joking, but I love that. I love when we are being held accountable by youth and families. When we get to the Q&A and you're asking us hard questions about what we're doing to address what's been happening for the last several years and frankly for decades. So that is the work that we continue, is supporting job seekers, supporting employees themselves, and really focusing on what is the supports that we can provide for families, especially in this moment, to make sure you get connected to the workforce.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the next portion of our discussion, right? Because the piece about young people wanting that stability, families wanting that financial stability is so important as we talk about young people with disabilities transitioning and growing into adulthood. And so we know that in these cases, people with disabilities often need additional supports, and these things cost. Specifically, the National Disability Institute has found that households that include a person with a disability have at least $17,000 in additional cost expenses, right, to live equitably, compared to families that do not have a person with a disability. So as you all think about this, what are some changes that need to happen to disconnect the disability experience and poverty? So we'll start with you, Maria. What are some things that need to happen so that we disconnect poverty from the disability experience?
Thank you so much for that question, Jennifer. I think there's many ways to look at this issue. One way is to look at how many opportunities are denied to people with disabilities because of stigma and because of a lack of inclusive education and a lack of inclusive and accessible employment opportunities. So we know that the employment rate of people with disabilities is extremely low. It hovers anywhere between 20 and 30% on any given year, and I'm sure Taryn can speak more directly to those numbers than I can. The workforce engagement rate overall, so this includes people who are looking for work, is even lower, and in fact, 70 to 80% of all disabled people in the United States are not engaged in the workforce. And I think it could be easy to say, well, these are disabled people, they either can't or don't want to work, and that is absolutely not true. And when I think about what it takes to actually get a job, it is truly a reflection of all of the other opportunities or barriers you have experienced to get to that point. Are you able to get a high school diploma, a college degree? Do you have access to transportation? I'm originally from Louisiana and I don't drive, and I knew that in order to have the kind of career I wanted, I would have to leave my family because I had no access to public transportation or reliable transportation. I would have been late every day to work and I would have gotten fired, right? And thankfully, I had opportunities to change that, but too many people don't. At AAPD, we run now 2 different internships for students and recent graduates with disabilities. I want to note that you can be a student or a recent graduate at any age in life. So our 2 most recent internship cohorts have ranged in age from 19 to 58. And this is important to note because we also know that you can become disabled at any point in your life. So at AAPD, we don't really talk about youth leaders, we talk about emerging leaders. And people can emerge as leaders in the disability space, again, at any age. With our internship program, we not only place students and recent grads with disabilities into paid internships, and they're paid $18 an hour. We provide accessible housing, a technology stipend, and a food stipend. And because of the pandemic, we began to provide remote internships. We recently conducted an evaluation of the 20 years of our internship program and found that all of our internship alumni, 75% of them are employed full-time. This is my favorite statistic. Are you ready? The average wage they earn per hour is $35 per hour. That is double the average wage of non-disabled people in the United States. Now, here's the issue. We are one organization, one program. We need opportunities like our internship program to exist for disabled people all over the country. We need investments in mentoring, which Jennifer, I know you do so much on inclusive mentoring. We need investments so that young people with disabilities can get access to career development opportunities so that they can learn what they like and, importantly, what they don't like and what they need to succeed. So that's one side of the coin for me. The other side of the coin is the ways in which our policies require us to remain in poverty in order to get the things that we need to survive. So we need to lift the substantial gainful activity limit on SSI.
Yes.
Right? People with disabilities should be able to save more than $1,200. We should not have to impoverish ourselves to get access to personal attendant services and home and community-based services. Every state needs to have a robust Medicaid buy-in program, right?
Yes.
And we also need to make sure that the wages for our direct support workers are actually life-sustaining wages so that people aren't having to work 3 and 4 jobs, and that our family caregivers are paid. Related to this, no one should be denied less access to paid care because they have a family member who lives at home. That makes no sense to me. So I'm going to stop there because I know Rebecca and Taryn and Jennifer have a lot to add.
Well, Rebecca, we can turn to you next.
Definitely. Can anyone tell me what has caused the 2 largest increases in disability employment since the ADA was passed? The first is telework. The second is Medicaid expansion. States that have expanded Medicaid have seen an increase in disability employment by over 14%. That is massive. And it again goes to what Maria was saying, is that, we put families, and let's be real, I want to talk to the families, because when I first started coming here, I was a youth. Now I'm a mom. I have a 12-year-old who doesn't want to be here, so he's up in the room probably texting his friends on his phone about how bored he is. We have families that are forced to be poor because of laws that haven't been changed in over 80 years. I got a call 2 weeks ago from a reporter at 2 in the morning, which is kind of not a call from a reporter being rare, but 2 a.m. is kind of rare. And she was traveling, and she said, you know, I just met this family, and they're living out of their car, and their son has autism. And the dad had to just turn down a promotion because they'll have too much in assets. And she's like, this can't be real. There's no way this is real. Like, she's like, please tell me who they need to talk to just like get the paperwork done to fix this. And I had to be like, honey, if it was only a paperwork snafu. I was like, these policies were set up that way. Also, like, the cruelty is the point. Like, the fact that families of people with disabilities, you know, it costs us $17,000 at least to be on equal footing as families without disabilities. No one's showing up at your doorstep with a $17,000 check, even though as family members, you're likely putting out over $17,000 worth of labor helping support your loved one. So we really need to unpack a lot of these policies. We need to see a dramatic increase and an elimination of asset limits. We need to see an end of the marriage penalty so that people with disabilities that want to get married can get married. Because marriage equality has... And stay married. Because we all know families who had to divorce in order to maintain health care. And I'm sorry, that's not family values. At least last time I checked, it wasn't family values. You know, we need to actually give people with disabilities the right to make choices. There was a young man several years ago that was actually part of Maria's internship program before she was over at AAPD, and he had gotten a full ride to Harvard Law School. And he lived in Illinois. And he had to turn it down because Massachusetts would only give him 6 hours of home care, where in Illinois he got 14. So mind you, he still went to law school. Is he doing as good as he would have done with a Harvard Law School education and no college debt? Absolutely not. So we actually really need, it's a question of choice too. Why is it that the choices for people with disabilities are so much more restricted than for people without disabilities?
Thank you for that. And, you know, as I, just observe as you all are talking, these various themes are rising to the top. Things regarding family, things regarding supports and connecting activities, right? It just makes me think of our guideposts for
I was going to be like,
success.
you're going to bring up the guideposts.
Yes, yes. So the Guideposts for Success is a framework that lays out what all youth, including those with disabilities, need to make successful transitions into adulthood, right? And so as Rebecca and Maria were speaking, and even some of the things that Terrence said earlier about some of the losses with regard to various types of work-based learning experiences, it just made me think about this framework. And as we go to the next piece of our discussion, I want to just kind of hammer in on families a little bit more, and because we know that families are a vital piece, a vital aspect of young people making that successful transition to adulthood with or without the disability. The support of family is so key. And so what I want to talk a little bit about now, Maria, is the relationships between family-led orgs and those led by people with disabilities. We know that historically there have been some tensions there, right? And so what are the opportunities for more solidarity?
Yeah, so Rebecca mentioned a little bit of these tensions in her previous remarks. As Jennifer noted, historically there's been a tension between parent-led orgs and disability-led organizations like the American Association of People with Disabilities. And also, as Rebecca mentioned, the disability rights movement really started with parent-led organizations, and so paternalism was a value that seeped into so many of the policies and community structures that disabled people were engaged with. And this became really toxic. So when you think about things like institutions, you are vulnerable, so you need to be segregated and kept safe in this place. That is a reflection of the paternalism that really guided a lot of early disability policy. And then we begin to see this shift in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that focuses on self-determination, agency, and advocacy of disabled people. And I think today, there's a lot of opportunity for solidarity, Jennifer. One, because of all the advancements in disability policy, disabled people are able to become parents, like Rebecca. You know, and it is, I remember when I met one of our former ODEP colleagues, a woman named Jennifer Kemp, who's presented here at this conference. She was the first adult woman I knew with cerebral palsy who had children. And when I met her, it was supposed to be like a professional networking conversation. My first 10 questions were like, how in the world did you have kids? Because I'd never met someone else like me who had children, and of course, that wasn't a conversation that I could really have with my own mom. And this speaks to the tension. My mom, and I think this is true for a lot of families, did and continues to do so much to make sure that I could live my life on my terms. However, when I was born, she was confronted with a baby with a child who she was scared for, and who doctors told her would likely never walk or talk. And she consistently had to confront, again, physicians, educators, administrators, who all they wanted to know about was my limitations. And it was the communication of my limits, what I needed, that made it possible for me to get services and supports. It wasn't a discussion of my strengths and my desires for the future. And so when you think about what that means, when you spend decades talking about your loved one's limitations, right, how difficult it is for them to like go to the bathroom, the person who believes in me the most is likely my mother. The person who sees my limits most clearly is also my mother.
Moms.
Right? And so it's so frustrating because I'll call her and I'll say like, oh yeah, I'm doing this today. How are you doing that, Maria? Well, Mom, I do this every day. It's fine, don't worry, I'm okay. And so I think we, hopefully, parents are seeing what systems have done to them and not just their kids. I also know that we have more parents who are identifying as disabled as they age into disability. And so there are moments of co-learning and sharing between disabled kids and their parents as their parents learn what it means to need access to things like ramps or a screen reader or hearing aids. And hopefully, I think as we destigmatize disability, and there's a lot happening there. Has anyone seen the new Spider-Man movie?
Twice.
Right? There's a disabled spider.
There's a disabled spider.
Right.
There are multiple disabled spiders.
Multiple disabled spiders in a Marvel movie.
It's a big deal. And it was created by 2 disabled creators.
That's
and
right.
There were over 10 disabled people involved in the crafting of Across the Spider-Verse.
And so as we see more opportunities like this, it's not only beneficial for disabled people to see themselves, but also our families to see what's possible.
Absolutely. And thank you both for sharing your perspectives there. Maria, as you talked, I kind of was chuckling to myself because I thought about, some of my own experiences with my mom. I think about how young she was when she had me. She was 18 and, not really exposed to a lot of resources and wasn't really aware of how the systems worked. And she was also caring for her elderly mother, right? And so there's been some discussion here. Rebecca, you mentioned, or maybe it was Maria, I'm sorry if I'm confusing the two, but we talk about like families having to step in and how, they may be growing into that space where they become disabled as well, and then what does that look like? So I was just thinking about that, right? But here at this point in my life, my mom and I are like, buddies when it comes to figuring things out. She'll call me, hey, who do I call about this? I know you know. But before, the story was, well, kind of like what you described, she had only been told about what I couldn't do. So it put this fear in her, and so it's amazing how there is that opportunity, and there's that room for things to change a bit once we begin to, really listen to each other. Because as you mentioned, Maria, I think with my mom as well, at the end of the day, she really believed in me more than anyone and wanted what was best for me more than anyone.
Yep.
But she had to combat the fears that she had as well. And so I could see that is, what is still happening today between family-led orgs versus youth-led orgs, as young people are stepping into their power and finding their voice, still figuring out how do I now, still work with parent-led organizations where maybe they see things a little differently or have had different experiences. Next, I want to start with you, Taryn. I want to talk a little bit now about marginalized communities. We know that disability is represented across all of these communities, right? Who is not at the table, and what can we do to create tables or spaces for them that are more representative?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm still stuck on the co-learning part, and it's sort of the power of mothers, maybe perhaps because just this morning, as I do every morning, I talk to my mother, and the very first question that she always asks me is, how much sleep did I get? Because she's known for so many years that sleep for me is such a deciding factor on whether or not I'm going to have a flare, and that nothing replaces that maternal instinct. It doesn't matter that I get enough sleep or don't. She just always asks that question, but we learn together. But that's not the question that you asked, and it's definitely something that we have been focused on quite a bit as an agency, and it's something that we've been focused on quite a bit as an administration. I will say, I'll just speak candidly. When we talk about disability, I'll speak from my own personal perspective, which is that when I go to work and when I am in a lot of spaces with other leaders, and I call it the Washington, D.C. leaders, the Beltway leaders, because leadership comes in every form all around this country. But I will enter spaces and people don't look like me. Not only do they not look like me, but I will often experience sort of like this moment where you will know that disability can coexist, as we all know, across every single identity, and disability exists at every single age, but yet often our policies and our programs and our systems are driven, or they're built with an expectation that disability looks one way. And that can be very challenging, and trying to unpack that, trying to do something as simple as saying that it's not people of color and people with disabilities, or people of color or people with disabilities, but in fact, it can be people of color with disabilities. It's not just about the language, but every time I hear that, I realize that how powerful the language is, because we come up with these artificial distinctions about what different communities are, and thus how we must serve, especially in government, how we must serve communities. Like, we're doing this for people of color. These are our programs for individuals who live in rural communities. These are our programs for urban communities. But life doesn't exist and need boundaries like that. It never has, and we know that. And so the work that we've done as a policy office, in part, is to push back on that narrative. And pushing back on that narrative not only starts with the language that we use, but it also starts with Maria was using this, Maria, Becca, we've all talked about data. What data do we have available about intersectionality? What data do we have available about the experiences of people with disabilities from various communities? We know, just as we know with accommodations and supports, there is no one size fits all, nor should there be policy making that assumes that disability is a monolith. But for us to even approach the ability to tailor policies and supports and services to our actual needs, we understand that we need to start to collect those data. And for us, that looks like understanding who is in the workforce, and to Maria's point, who is being left out of the workforce, and understanding that on a much more granular level. It also, and I'll say this, and I know we want to get to Q&A, so much of the work that we do starts with ensuring that it's grounded in the actual experiences of people who will be impacted by the policy. I referenced the panel that we did earlier, but across all of the work that we're doing, we understand that if it's just us in a policy office making up good ideas that are somehow magically going to support people, that doesn't work, and it's never worked. And so ensuring that when we're talking about the actual communities, that it's grounded in conversation, it's grounded in community, it's grounded in even our more bureaucratic ways of collecting information and collecting the experiences and understanding and reflecting on the experiences of various communities, that is an important way that we start to break down those boundaries that have existed.
Yes, the data and these collecting and knowing about and being able to apply information regarding the lived experiences of folks who represent or who haven't been represented is so key. Maria, we'll move to you next. Can you talk a little bit about who you see needing to be present at the table, and what can be done to ensure that there is more representation?
So building off of Taryn's points, we as a disability community and movement must do more to center the experiences of disabled people of color. Part of that, going to the data point, also means addressing racism in our healthcare and medical industries. So we know that Black and brown young people are more likely to be diagnosed with a behavior disorder than they are to be diagnosed with autism when they are actually autistic. And what this causes is Black and brown students, instead of being understood as autistic, are marked as having behavior problems. They receive significantly higher rates of punishment, in-school suspension and expulsion, and ultimately we see a path from as young as preschool into prison. And so I think about how many of our disabled brothers and sisters who are in prisons and jails, in immigrant detention centers, and in congregate settings and nursing homes. And I recognize I'm in Florida, where there is currently a lawsuit by the Department of Justice against nursing home facilities for segregating youth as young as 5, because families here are not given the resources to make better choices. And so we need to really be making space specifically for disabled people of color who are segregated in congregate settings. And again, I want to shout out Rev Up Florida. In the 2020 election, Rev Up Florida worked with community partners to do phone banks to congregate settings across the state to register voters. They did incredible work, and we need to make sure that the disability community in every state is resourced to do the same.
Thank you, Maria. And you provided a perfect example of how folks can get involved, right, and see these changes made in their local communities. Rebecca, we'll go to you next. Can you talk a little bit about who's not at the table and what changes can be made around increasing that representation?
You know, we know that over 1/3 of people with disabilities live in the South. And yet we don't see equitable representation and conversations on policy issues of people with disabilities and families that include people with disabilities in the South, and like driving the policy changes that we need. Which I think, you know, even the conversations around the rolling out of various infrastructure packages, thinking about how do we get our communities that so desperately need, whether it be access to public transportation dollars, an increase in broadband access, because we actually know that less than 40% of people with disabilities have regular access to the internet. Like, all of these things contribute to that nexus of who's not at the table and who's not being heard. You know, and so figuring out how do we resource those spaces. And so, you know, for us at the Ford Foundation, it means supporting organizations like the Association for Programs for Rural Independent Living, APRIL. It means, you know, supporting organizations like the New Disabled South, which has been developed by my colleague and friend Dom Kelly and a bunch of other folks coming out of Georgia to talk specifically about what are the issues facing people with disabilities and their families in the South. You know, it means supporting groups like Communication First, which is an organization for people who use augmentative communication devices to talk. That group is never at the table. That group is often told it takes too long to have a conversation to include them at the table. And to actually be able to resource organizations like that, support the work that they're doing to actually shift who's at the table. You know what? Forget the table. Let's throw the table out and turn it into kindling, and let's build something bigger at this point, because the table that currently exists is crap. It purposely keeps people out. We're setting it on fire. We're setting the table on fire. And we can roast s'mores on the ashes of the table. Y'all are laughing like this is something new. Like, you know, burn it down. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for the majority of people with disabilities and their families, because we're still poor. Because we still have less choices than our siblings without disabilities, and that's crap. You know, and so what is the new paradigm? What is it that we're putting out there? And I really do think, you know, I was talking to some folks in the hot tub the other night when my family and I checked in here. Yes, totally chilling in the hot tub. The hot tub is awesome. I encourage you all to check it out. And all work gets done in the hot tub. And we were talking about a bill that a bunch of advocates were supporting around the need to shift the conversation around organ transplant access for people with disabilities. It is legal in this day and age to deny a disabled person an organ solely on the basis of the fact that they're disabled. That's ridiculous. Like, I'm a little person. My dwarfism has nothing to do with the fact that I might need a heart or a lung someday, but yet my dwarfism can actually make me ineligible for that, even though it doesn't directly impact my need for that heart or that lung. And thinking about just that level of like entrenched segregation, and hearing these advocates from the state say, no, like, we're actually really pushing for significant change in this space. It's that. It's like, if there's something that you all feel needs to be changed, how can we be supportive of lifting up the work that you're doing, your advocacy work? How can we be a megaphone for what you all are doing to help lift up the kind of change that you're trying to drive, not just for your family, not just for your son or daughter, but actually for the entirety of your community?
So, Rebecca, I heard that all work gets done in the hot tub.
All work gets done in the hot tub.
Access is important, resources. Just burn the table down and build something new.
Burn it down.
Burn the table down and build a hot tub.
Yes, there we go.
that
There's the idea. Even though there's some of our friends I would not want to see in a hot tub. No. Yeah.
We have to figure out how to make the hot tub even more accessible too. Like, that'd be a component.
Accessible, universally designed hot tubs for everyone.
There we go. There we go.
Tax credit for universally designed hot tubs for everybody.
We need to note these things. We really do. So for the next question, I want to make sure we have time for the Q&A as well. So I'll just leave this one to anyone who wants to respond. So the losses of Lois Curtis and Judy Human were significant to the disability community. What is the legacy of these two women, and how do we continue to learn from their legacies and carry them forward?
I can start. So we've talked about Judy Human a bit already. So I want to talk about Lois Curtis. Lois Curtis was the lead plaintiff in LC versus Olmstead, or what you all should now know as the Olmstead decision. It came out of the Supreme Court in 1999, and it basically said that you cannot forcibly segregate or institutionalize disabled people when services can be provided in the community. So let's talk about another youth leader who would never be called that, Lois Curtis. She was a woman with intellectual disabilities and mental health disabilities, and she began to be institutionalized when she was very young, as early as 12, in Georgia. And by the time she was 19, she was calling the Atlanta Legal Aid Society saying, I want to get out. It took years, years, for her case to make it to the Supreme Court, but ultimately the court sided with Lois and her friend Elaine, who had also joined the suit. And Lois began to live outside of the institution and in her community. That's usually where Lois's story kind of stops, and we celebrate that. Lois died last year in her 50s. And if you look at the full course of her life, she spent as much time, if not more time, in institutions than she did in the community, because community living for her was not straightforward. She was truly a trailblazer. The systems that she needed in order to live in the community had to be built while she was out there. And so there were often times when she had to go back in to this institution and then come back out. She developed a circle of support, a community of friends who supported Lois's passions for painting. She was an accomplished and celebrated artist, and ultimately, I think one of the highlights for her was providing President Obama with one of her paintings. She died of cancer, pancreatic cancer, at the end of last year. And I think one of the things that we can learn from both Lois and Judy is not to be afraid to demand the future that you want, even if you don't know what it looks like. Just like Lois, Judy was a trailblazer and literally had to create systems for inclusive education and employment. And it didn't matter that they hadn't seen it before. They knew it was possible for them, and they said, I want out, I want in the community, and then made it possible for people like me, Rebecca, Taryn, and Jennifer to do the same with our lives.
Thank you. And Maria, what you said about not being afraid to demand the future you want, that's so powerful, and I think it's demonstrated in a lot of the movements that we see with young people today and families. Anyone else wanted to respond to that question before we go to Q&A?
I'm going to hijack your Q&A bit. We're going over a little bit of time. It's all right with you, panel?
I don't think so.
It's all right with you? Have to close down today.
Lori, you have to use the mic.
So if it's all right with you panelists, I'm going to ask you all to give them a nice round of applause. They're going to be available for all questions and answers for a little while. down at the bottom of the stage area. Okay, this is a big switch for them. They thought they were taking some from the front. Do you want to? All right, I'm going to switch it. I'm sorry. We'll switch it back. Give them a few minutes if you can ask about 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and then we'll ask them to go down to the end, okay? I'm sorry, I just looked at my watch. I thought it said 1 o'clock already. I apologize.
No worries.
Anybody have any questions for the panels? Stand up and Tammy will walk to you.
So I have been trying to advocate for my daughter who's 29 and in the workforce for the limits on her earned income that she can make. I email my senators, my congressmen, I call them, that some of them know me well by name. But who do I go to for a bigger voice? How can I help? How can we work together so that we can address this issue? She doesn't deserve to have to be caught in this poverty trap. And I just want to know, what can we do to team together? How can we make this bigger and louder for our government?
This is Maria. So I think I'm literally the only person on this panel who can answer this question.
Yeah.
Because there are restrictions on what both Rebecca and Assistant Secretary Williams and Jennifer can say on current legislation. So, ma'am, what is your name? Kathy,
Sandiford.
nice to meet you. And what's your daughter's name?
Shelley.
Well, Kathy, one, thank you for what you're doing, and my thanks to Shelley as well. There are multiple pieces of legislation that have been introduced in the U.S. House and in the Senate to raise the income limits on SSI and Medicaid. And now the names have left me, but when you call, it's the Asset Act? When you call, I think what's really important when you call your representatives is to actually know the bill names and numbers. So you're not talking about anything new that they have to craft or research or introduce. It's already out there. So the Asset Act is a bill that lifts the substantial gainful activity limit to end the disabled poverty trap. There is also a bill that ends the marriage penalty so that Shelley can get married if she ever wants to, or won't have to get divorced if she's ever able to get married. And you need to know those bill numbers and make sure to ask them to be a co-sponsor. I'm not sure what congressional district you live in, but for some reps, a discussion of dignity is going to be more powerful, and for other reps, what you need to say is, my daughter should not be denied opportunities to work and earn a good living for her family. That's going to work with some other representatives, so we'll have a conversation about what congressional district you live in. Organizations like the American Association of People with Disabilities, my organization, the ARC of the United States, another organization called Data for Progress, the Center for American Progress, and many more, have campaigns on these bills. And so connecting with those organizations and also making sure our organizations know that you are willing to talk to your representatives is really important, because we are always, always on the lookout for folks like yourself who can tell a compelling story, to put a face to these numbers, and know that these income limits aren't doing things like preventing fraud. They're actually causing harm to individuals who want to work and to the families who support them.
Do we have time for one more question? One more question, all right.
Based on the disparity of treatment witnessed by all the panelists here, I would like to ask you what type of evolution do you foresee in the disability right around the country?
Yeah, that, test. Test, can you hear me? Yeah, that is the great question that I could probably have another panel on, just sort of where we see the evolution of disability rights as a result of the pandemic. I will tell you, I struck a note of pessimism and optimism just recently. I'm going to speak about this from an employment perspective. It is absolutely always where my mind is. We are in a moment where a lot of systems, people, and just the natural tendency of individuals is that we have to return back to normal. I don't know what normal is. I don't know if we'll ever have a shared definition of what normal is, but there is this like overwhelming pressure. I see it in traditional media. I see it in social media. I see this desire to return to, it's almost to the comfort of the way things are. And I will tell you that terrifies me. It terrifies me because something that we did see, I won't go as far as calling it a silver lining over the last few years, but there was incredible advocacy. There was advocacy to fight for home and community-based services. There was advocacy to fight for access to telehealth. There was advocacy to fight for eliminating discriminatory health standards in medical settings. And so I think with the growth in advocacy, I think in the moment where we see an increased number of people with disabilities, individuals who have acquired long COVID, individuals who may acquire disabilities, mental health conditions, in the coming years, my hope is that there will be organizing and advocacy, and that we won't lose that moment that we were in, that concentration and that focus to do what Maria was talking about just a little while ago, which is absolutely demanding the world that we want to see, and being unafraid of creating it just as we were demanding it. And I see that in employment. I see that we need to demand workplaces, and we need to demand wages that are commensurate with the work that we're doing. We need to fight for that. We shouldn't be accepting outdated wages or pennies on the hour for work that we're doing. But there's so many other examples in health policy and in living in our communities where I want to see that energy as well. Stop there. I could really talk about this for another hour.
Give them a nice round of applause. A lot of information, a lot of burning to do. I like the s'mores part because I didn't have lunch yet. But guys, we got some work to do. And we're going to do it together. But we've got some great resources up here. So thank you all again. And again, there's going to be